So, music is worthless now. You may be saying music is one of the richest things. No, but I mean like monetarily. In terms of monetary value, it is completely and utterly worthless. Think about it. You can get most songs in the world for free right now if you go on the phone you're using to watch this video and look up like YouTube Music or Spotify. YouTube Music you don't even need to create an account for. I don't know if you need to for Spotify either. But either way, you really don't need anything to listen to every single piece of music ever created. It's absurdly easy nowadays. So yeah, I'm gonna just talk about the history of music and how it came to get so cheap. And before you start getting angry, no, I'm not saying music is worthless. I'm just saying that the monetary cost for music has gotten severely cheaper as time has gone on. And I'm not even saying that's a bad thing. It's excellent to have access to multiple cultures. This is just a topic I know a bit about. I'm sure there's people out there who know more about this topic, but just from what I know, I want to have a nice little talk. So, music was originally a very hot commodity. Oh, the Z, I said it to Z a while ago. So, the only way you could afford it is if you taught yourself how to play music and owned an instrument. And then it wasn't really enjoyable. It was only enjoyable for the people around you. So generally, multiple people... I don't have an offhand. So generally, multiple people would know how to play the instrument, so people could share their experiences. Well, not share their experiences, but like enjoy each other. So, what's the natural progression of this? Being able to record it. But how do you do that? Well, that's for Alexander... No, it wasn't that guy, but it was some guy. I don't remember who, because I'm not an expert on this topic. Yeah, he created the first sort of vinyl player. It wasn't really vinyl. It was more so... well, it was vinyl. It had like the bones of vinyl in it. But in essence, he had a wax cylinder which had little grooves in it, and that's how it read out the music. And the recorders he used were horrible for spoken word. So in order for so the only things people could record with it was music. So that's when music got a lot easier to access. Like, it's a bigger leap than I think we've ever had in music. You no longer have to go and have to be taught about it. You just go and buy a record and set it up, and you just play it. You just play it, and you can suddenly have access to almost every single piece of music in the world. Sure, it's lower quality, but you weren't it was so much more convenient. It didn't really matter. Sorry about that. Yeah, it's just the biggest leap that's probably ever been seen in the music scene, in music, going from having to play it to being able to play it through vinyl records or wax cylinders. It can't be understated how insane of a leap that was. Yeah, they got cheaper and cheaper and more refined, and until to the point where music on there for really high-end setup sounds better than music does on the average setup today. So that was kind of the peak there. So I don't know much about this era of music, how we went from listening to vinyl records to like Walkman, but I know at some point along there we figured out how to make tapes, which using, well, not tapes specific, but like magnetic tapes. Whatchamacallit. So yeah, these magnetic tapes could store far more data and were far more easy to mass produce. So yeah, that was kind of the next big leap with the idea of an MP3 player. Well, not no, freak, with the idea of a tape player. And these took the form many different things. Oh shoot. Sorry, rewind. I found the in between. Radio. Radio was the in between. It was being wirelessly broadcasted from these big setups all since like the 40s. And that was even when TV took off. People think TV and radio were solidly behind each other, but they actually had a resurgence around the same time. It was just radio was the more portable version. You didn't have to lug around a whole television set and a power supply to do it all. Besides, the people going on the go, at least at the time, didn't want to watch videos. They wanted to listen to music and be around, kind of like how we are now, except less so now because of phones. But we still try. Like, still the primary thing, especially teens use their phones for is for music because they just always have it playing. Because it feels like a more organic way of using your phone because you can still interact with people. So yeah, and radios, well, before radios and TVs coexisted, radios were the TVs. They existed in living rooms as like these big media centers that people would always congregate around, sort of like a fireplace. Except they probably still had a fireplace because by then proper heating wasn't a thing yet. But yeah, so that gradually evolved into portable radio, which is where a lot of analog companies got their start. Like, I think that's when Sony really became known. That and the tape player with and recorder. Well, specifically the tape recorder. But what kind of gave but because the Walkman, well, it sold well for its time, but in general it didn't sell all that well. Like in terms of numbers. Sure, it started an entire revolution, but it still didn't sell insane. It just sold well for the time, especially for a new technology. So yeah, that it the invention of the Walkman and tapes rather than radio kind of sparked a whole nother music revolution. One that meant you didn't have to constantly rely on a signal to get your music. You just had to carry around a stack of tapes, which some people would definitely argue that that's worse, but I think overall it was for most people it was an improvement, especially because tapes could hold like the better tapes could hold like 10 songs, I think. Yeah, 10, 20-ish songs. So it was like you had a tiny playlist with you. It wasn't abhorrent like it was with records. Well, still, records were honestly could still hold like 5 songs, but that's not enough for like a proper playlist, and you couldn't take it with you. So yeah, that's when tapes became a thing, and they lasted honestly not very long. It seemed like there was a whole era there, which it was, but it was a very tiny era between the era between the era of the Walkman and portable MP3s. But portable MP3 players in the beginning were awful. Like, and people didn't understand it. It was like Bitcoin today. Even in the especially in the early days where people were only playing it on their PCs, they were like, music on our computer? How's what? You're kidding. Yeah, there was like entire dummies guides to how MP3s worked. It was kind of hilarious. But yeah. So when you weren't listening to it on your PC, you still probably used your Walkman because portable MP3 players at the time were heinous in the amount of stuff they could hold. Like, they had probably 32 megabytes of storage, which is 20 songs? Let's see. I want to say about 20 songs. It might be a bit more than that. But it was horrible how few songs could be held. Until Apple. Some people say Apple doesn't innovate, but they do. It's just in ways that we don't consider blatant innovation. It's kind of like how well, actually, I don't know if this is true, but it's kind of like how some people argue that Ford wasn't as much of a revolutionary as people come out to be. He was. He just didn't innovate in the way that people see as vanilla innovation. He innovated in the way they make something cheaper and more accessible and actually usable. And that's what Apple does with nearly everything. Computers, they do that with. Phones, they did that with. In fact, VR headsets, I think they're taking a little bit longer to do that with, but they're going to do it with that as well. Same thing with smartwatches. Smartwatches were a thing, question mark? But not really. Until Apple came along. So, what did they do to innovate? Well, they came up with the iPod. And what's the iPod, you might be asking? Well, if you're too young to know that, then you're probably too young to be on YouTube. Actually, no. Oh, yeah, still, I think people don't give Gen Z enough credit with how much they know about old technology. Especially because there's a bunch of retro stuff YouTubers that are becoming popular now, so the knowledge of this technology is becoming known. But still, many of you probably don't know it, even if you're not absolute toddlers, which I'm sure some. Shoot, why am I being so brain dead today? Which I'm sure some millennials and older Gen Z people would like to tell themselves that it's a bunch of snot-nosed brats who don't know anything, but it's really like I know people who are in their 20s who have no idea what a Walkman is. Why does this keep happening? But yeah, with the iPod, basically they added 5 gigabytes of storage rather than the measly 128 megabytes that was the standard at the time. And that storage was big. That at the time, that and the hard drives that were needed to run that sort of thing at the time were massive. But I think it was Toshiba who came up with the iPod hard drives. And they didn't even know what to do with them because MP3 players were still so niche. And the things that did use properly sized drives before that were called jukeboxes, similar to how the big bulky pseudo portable tape players were called jukeboxes. So, yeah. So Apple paid a lot of money for exclusive rights to those drives, and bam, we have the iPod, and that blew up. And they started using flash storage as well in their nanos, and yeah. But then the iPhone, which at the start was still basically an iPod. Like the iPod in terms of the iPhone in terms of music couldn't do anything that the iPod couldn't. Like there was no streaming songs at the time. It was quite literally an iPod. It didn't have anything special about it except for the fact that it did like 15 other things besides being an iPod. So the iPod hung in there for a while, and so did digital media as a whole. So essentially, yeah, the ability to download songs allowed you to take far more stuff on the go, and it allowed you to, get that stuff far more easily. Like, people don't fully understand how hard it was, at least comparatively, to deal with not MP3 players, but tape players. I think this is about done. But yeah. So we had digital music for a while, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, even if you just exist today. Even if you didn't fully know what was going on in like 2001, you still understand the concept of downloading music. If you've downloaded a video game, you've downloaded music, or downloaded a movie for a car trip. Yeah, people understand the concept. So yeah, I don't need to explain that to you so much, but then we move over to streaming, because digital media still had some worth to it. You paid $1 per song, which is actually pretty well, actually not that expensive. Like, if you think about it, cassettes and records were 10 times more expensive than that. But yeah, they were $1 per song, so a large music library still had a little bit of worth behind it monetarily. Not a ton, but that meant you could also have bigger libraries, which many people did. And bigger libraries meant more money spent, so they still had a little bit of monetary value, and that added a lot of value to iPods themselves and phones. But this video is running out of time, so I gotta move on to streaming. So, streaming is probably the main way you listen to your music. Essentially, there's a giant server with all the music you've ever listened to playing, and through that server, it beams down, and when you click play, that server starts up and it beams down the music to you, so you hear it through your device, even if you have nothing installed on it. So, that's how streaming works, crash course. But yeah, that's when stuff became worthless. Like, Spotify offered free accounts with ads, but still, the ads are fine. People deal with them on YouTube all the time. And even if you do pay for the premium, it's like $7 a month. So it's not like if you have a crazy big library, you paid a ton of money for it. So yeah, music right now is monetarily worthless. Bye-bye.